Okay, welcome back. There are so many things to read online now, so many different rabbit holes to pursue and explore. Unfortunately, many of them really lead nowhere. They're repeating other people's materials, which have been often cobbled together in new configurations to keep people, I guess they call it clickbait. I don't like to use trite cliches, but that's what they are. And then you've got the green screen political analyst commentators that are, God only knows how many of those there are now. And some of them are very serious and sincere. That's all well and good, but very few of them are saying anything new. If you're able to connect dots, you're able to see what's going on. What's going on here is not good. Just quickly, Trump today, Tuesday, rallied a crowd of largely mask-less student supporters in Phoenix at that church. Dream City Church, I think it's called. About 3,000 of them. And he says that the Democrats are trying to keep the country shut down during the coronavirus pandemic in order to hurt the economy before the election and prevent him from having another 4 years to screw things up. Wow. There's a piece on CNN. Let me see if I can find this. Just had it a minute ago. Hold on. Here it is. It's entitled, now we know CNN is socialist, leftist, liberal, progressive. We know they hate Trump. We got that. But this is a very interesting piece. Chris Cillizza, Chiliza, maybe? I don't know how he pronounces it. CNN editor at large, okay? It's entitled, "This is the most succinct and brutal Republican rejection of Donald Trump that you will ever read." And I was able to scan through a little bit of it, and it's pretty brutal. But it is also rather inarguably logical in its trajectory. It's not specious silliness. It is a very interesting analysis, which didn't come from Chris Chiliza, but Steve Schmidt, the gentleman who ran John McCain's 2008 campaign for president. He was interviewed on MSNBC, and they've quoted that interview. That's what the bulk of this article is. It's that interview transcribed. Steve Schmidt. You remember John McCain in 2008? Dead last in the pool of losers, and within 10 days he was number one because 3 or 4 newspapers endorsed him, and the switch was thrown. He's going to be the designated loser, and that's what happened. But this is really, let me just read just a little of this, and we'll get right to our guest. It starts out, Donald Trump has been the worst president this country has ever had. And I don't say that hyperbolically. He is. But he is a consequential president, and he has brought this country in 3 short years to a place of weakness that is simply unimaginable if you were pondering where we are today from the day when Obama left office. 3 years, 3.5 years. All right, there's been a lot of damage done to this country. Psychological, emotional, damage across the board, and it's not nearly over. And Dr. Eric Karlstrom, who knows an awful lot about targeted individuals, which in a way we all are and have been since the plandemic, scamdemic was unleashed on the people. That is not to say this is a virus you want to have. You don't want to have it. This is a bad virus. But the percentages so far of fatalities, very small and very flu-like. But beyond that, what it's being used for is quite clear: to damage the American psyche, to confuse people, to instill and install fear, stress, anxiety, and all the rest. And it has worked beautifully. Eric Karlstrom, welcome back. How are you?
Well, thank you very much, Jeff, for having me on again. It's great to continue our conversation. And these are very, very confusing times, and it's important, I think, to have a couple perspectives perhaps that, of people like perhaps yourself and I who have watched things over many decades and can find some themes that might help shed light on our topic. And I do think you hit it right. I think this is a gigantic psychological operation, the largest in history, and plandemic, scamdemic, yes, they plan these things ahead of time, as the 2010 Rockefeller report proves. Rockefeller Foundation report, and then, of course, the event 201 in the fall of 2019. They simulate, they script, they write their scenarios, and then they just bring it. It's the scientific dictatorship. COVID 1984, I think, would be a good term for it.
Good. Yeah, that works for sure. Yeah. Trump also said in Arizona, I'm just going through some of these stories. Trump said today, my border wall stopped the coronavirus. What planet is he living on? First of all, he didn't build a border wall. All he did was rehabilitated a couple 100 miles of existing wall. That's it. It didn't stop the virus, for God's sakes. The virus flew in here from Asia through the West Coast. Yes, he stopped China Airlines, but he didn't stop Japan Airlines, Korean Airlines, or half a dozen other major carriers flying back and forth. And he never stopped anything flying in from Europe, which is where the Italian strain came from. So his wall has absolutely nothing to do with nothing about the virus. Anyway, this is really loopy land, Derek. I'm sorry, it's getting worse.
Yeah, and very much so. And, I think Trump, like his predecessors, Obama, Bush too, Clinton, going back a long way, have been handled by more powerful individuals. There are many, many things that they don't have the sufficiently high classification to even know, because they really have turned into figureheads. So I think in large measure, the apparent maneuvers of and even the talking points of the different candidates are meant mainly as a distraction, which is why I think it's very useful to kind of take that historical perspective and look at how things have evolved over many decades, and perhaps how we got here from there. I believe that what we're looking at now is kind of our version of the Bolshevik Revolution, of course, 1917, which was fomented by, Wall Street and City of London banking interests. Right. And of course, that was brutal to the Russian culture and to the peoples. The Alexander Solzhenitsyn says 66 million were tortured and killed. So this is not a warm and fuzzy group. I don't believe that is going for total control. I do believe that they're trying to do a revolution of the entire world now, as perhaps we see with the this massive psyop wherein they have 5 billion people confined to their homes. Never before in history have healthy people been quarantined, and now we have five. I think what's coming along here, of course, is a fast track to the New World Order. The war on COVID-19 is being orchestrated, and this whole thing is being staged as a kind of a fast track. Apparently, they weren't getting enough mileage out of the war on terrorism, which of course is also fraudulent. So what we have is military intelligence, Department of Defense, CIA, and many other NSA groups actually executing plans of the financial elite, and we see that going back a long way, Jeff. As you know, we could talk about the Kennedy assassination, we could talk about 9/11, we can talk about the global warming fraud, which was perhaps the most massive psychological operation up until COVID-19. But once you start to see the cover stories and then dig down and then get to the real story, which is concealed by the cover story, time after time after time, we see the fingerprints of the same players. And, of course, it is the financial elite, and they've gone by many names, sometimes called the deep state, et cetera, the Illuminati, whatever. But, yeah, they want full, total world control. Says it wants total population control. And obviously it's not doing that to help the American people. It's doing that for its payments.
Right, exactly right. This is not going to have a good ending. I'm sorry to say. That's just the truth. We haven't seen the full... The volume hasn't been turned up all the way on this communist, socialist, progressive, Bolshevik revolution. It's in its early stage, but it's all right there. This is what this really is when you think about it, and it's a perfect example of, if you want to see how Donald Trump is not in control of anything, just watch his relations with the Pentagon lately. They're refusing to do what he asks, so he doesn't even ask anymore. He doesn't want to take the chance of being slammed again, so he's not doing anything. He's starting to go back to... He's out of the loop. He's starting to go back and quote some of the same garbage he tricked us with 4.5 years ago. That campaign went on for a year and a half, and it did trick me. I was taken. I said, look, in my own way, I said, if that guy will only do 25% of what he's promising, we win. But he didn't do anything. 1%? I don't know, whatever it is. He's just a total fraud. And that's what we got. And
that's right.
Wouldn't have made any difference. It doesn't matter who's in the White House. The controllers are going to continue to operate business as they want. And it doesn't matter who's there. If anybody in the White House gets out of line, they just JFK them or otherwise compromise them to where they're just inept. And looking even worse than that in Trump's case. He looks so bad now by way of his actions. Go ahead.
Yeah, Jeff, I remember reading a story in January that there was a memo of understanding to the effect that the military, the intelligence agencies, and Silicon Valley would handle the response to COVID-19. Well, that tells you right there that President Trump is out of the loop. So, as you said, when Trump tried to order the National Guard to protect the White House in Washington, D.C., and Defense Secretary Mark Esper overturned the order and said, no, we won't do that. Really, what that was, I mean, the basis of authority lines in the Republic, the constitutional basis of our nation was thrown out the window at that point. That was treason for Mark Esper to say, no, I don't think I'd like to follow that order. So what we have is a runaway freight train. It's a police state. It's a military police state, military intelligence police state, corporatocracy, and some people calling it the Great Reset. This would be the World Forum billionaire types that want to usher in this new world order that they've been trying to put in place for a long time. And I expect that this is really what's happening, that they want to have this massive reset police state. Your constitutional rights no longer apply. Now we're in a new world, they tell us. And, of course, we heard that after 9/11, but this is now nothing is going to be the same again. Well, this is all rhetoric coming from the very, very top echelons. And if we, the people, don't figure out a way to get our voices heard, to get our voices into the conversation, then I think that this is all going to come to pass, as you say. And we're not looking at a happy ending. I have no crystal ball, but if we look at the French Revolution, of 1789, that was coming out of the Illuminati and the Masonic lodges in France as a planned revolution, to take down the monarchy there and to change the nature of France, and it did. But meanwhile, it was an extraordinarily bloody terrorist war, just insane bloodletting. And we saw the same thing with the Red Terror, with the Bolshevik Revolution. So this crowd loves blood. They love war. They love misery. They love suffering. A.K. Chesterton said the proper study of political man is elites. Who's behind this? What do they stand to gain? Well, we know that the neocons have run American foreign and domestic policy for, a number of decades now. We know that Bill Gates and George Soros and this consortium of mega billionaires, the mega group, Jewish billionaires, have enormous power and clout right now. So it's not that hard to track down the, and then the World Economic Forum, the Davos crowd, the Bilderbergers, etc. It's not hard to find the elitists who are. It is a revolution from the top, as the Soviet Revolution was, and as the French Revolution was. So we, the people, need to understand that. But I think the enormous problem that I see, there's so many good and intelligent Americans who have what we can call, I guess, a normalcy bias. I've heard that word bandied about, which is, hey, if I just get along and go along, everything's going to be fine. But they don't have the background to understand that things could get very ugly very quickly.
Yeah, I'm not encouraged. And what really bothers me also is what some of these large city councils are doing, mayors, governors of states. This Governor Inslee of Washington, that Seattle City Council, their idiot mayor who says first she's going to disperse CHOP, and then she says, well, we'll look for a way to try to allow the zone to remain in some fashion or not. They just vote like communists, all of them. They're just not voting like Americans. This is an internationally financed invasion of the territorial sovereignty of the republic. And Trump is totally on the basis of his oath of office to defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic, is failing. This is arguably treasonous. He is not sending the military to clean this obviously and provably internationally financed movement out. He didn't do it. So,
well, he tried, Jeff, and then Mark Esper, the Department of Defense Secretary, said, no, we're not going to do it. So his hands are tied. He's not the boss anymore. So in that sense, the revolution has occurred. And now we're in the control of this power elite that obviously controls our military and intelligence branch. And there will be foreign and domestic elements to this elite. And I think the word we want to start using more is communitarian, because communist, of course, is the same people more or less put together the crony capitalism, the communism, the fascism, just about any ism you can find. But what has been pushed behind the scenes for decades now with the Rio Earth Summit is this concept of communitarianism, which is now individual sovereignty and national sovereignty takes a back seat to the needs of the community, whatever that is. And of course, the elite get to decide what the needs of the community are.
Well said. Yeah. This is. Do you know Nikki Rapana? You
yes,
must.
I was going to bring up her name. Yeah, she did some wonderful work on this back in the early 2000s. I have it on my websites.
Yeah. Nikki used to be frequent on this program. She was the one who brought that term forward, communitarianism. She was the one who was, in my view, I don't know anybody else who was making more noise than she. She was really the one to roll this thing out. And you're right. Anything with COMMUN in it, you got to remember it's communism. And again, I urge all of you to go to the site, look at the search engine, and just type in 22 communist goals. That's all. And I've pulled 22 out of the 45 that were read into the congressional record in 1963 by Representative Herlong. And you read those 22 and you ask yourself, how many of those have they achieved? And you're in for a shock. That's their goal. They've been around a long time. This is nothing new. The planning goes back a century probably or longer.
Yes.
Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, well, I've got several of her YouTube interviews and her articles on my gangstalkingmindcontrolcults.com website, and I'll read just the first couple lines from one of her articles. This is Nikki Rapana, 2006. Communitarianism, a three-level con job is the name of the article. She says, 21st century communitarianism is a philosophical, political, and legal theory. It combines every opposite theory in the history of the world, the big hodgepodge. It's a projected vision for a new global order by the year 2020. It's what all of us should be socially evolving into. Okay, she wrote that in 2006, and here we are in 2020. I believe we're getting this communitarianism concept, which is, of course, the main underpinning of the Rio Earth Summit of 1992 and the Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. This is now going to be the new philosophy, religion of the 21st century that will supplant all of our constitutional liberties if we don't, as a people, figure this out and figure out a way to block it.
I don't know how that's going to occur because people are already so hegemonized, suppressed, repressed, oppressed, and depressed with no action possible to get to the mainstream platform to communicate with their fellow Americans except online. And online, believe me, and Eric knows this as well as anybody, is loaded with operatives and assets and other forms of assets. There's a lot of people online that just are misleading the sheep all the time. They do. Hang on. We'll be right back with Dr. Eric Karlstrom. Okay, welcome back. Talking with Eric Karlstrom about the state of the nation. As we said, this is going to get more pronounced. This is just the rollout of what the plans are. Blacks are being used, again, as they always are, by vested interests. They're still slaves to the international Zionist movement that originally enslaved them 400 years ago and sold them into slavery here. It's the same thing. There's one brave rapper. He's trying to warn African Americans that George Soros is using Black Lives Matter to control African Americans in this election year. Well, of course, everything is a tool to influence, use, and otherwise coerce responses from the sheep. That's what they're doing. Nothing new.
No, it certainly isn't new, Jeff. We lived through the 60s, and, of course, this was tried back in the 60s to get a foment a race war that would tear the country apart. And they came pretty close to accomplishing that. The 60s were a very dramatic time, but now that we look back on it with perhaps clearer sight, we see so much of what happened was orchestrated by military intelligence as well. For instance, that great book, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, which talks about the hippie counterculture movement really being a military operation and a psychological operation at that.
Who wrote that book? Darn it.
Great writer from Los Angeles, from that area, from the Laurel Canyon area.
He was on. I had him on. Then he died. Sadly.
Yeah, I think he had fast-induced cancer. But, yeah, it's a wonderful book.
That's the same thing that David Dees was, he believed. He told me before he died, he said, they gave it to me. And he believed it.
Yeah, it's dangerous. It's dangerous to be a truth teller. Very dangerous. And you mentioned earlier that I'm one of the targeted individuals. Well, one of the reasons that I'm spending so much time with my gangstalkingmindcontrolcults.com website is to try to work to educate people about the exotic weapons that are being used, and and the no-touch torture and the soft kill, silent kill, slow kill methodologies that the Pentagon and the CIA in particular have developed with academicians, since World War II. This has been a vast, secret, classified series of black projects. But before I get into that, Jeff, I just wanted to read this quote because it fits right into what you said. This is by George Soros in an interview with Germany's BILD, September 2014. This is George Soros speaking. I'm going to bring down the United States by funding black hate groups. We'll put them into a mental trap and make them blame white people. The black community is the easiest to manipulate. At least this is the quote that I've got in front of me, and coming from this particular website, which is Jim Stone,
I want that
journalist.
quote. That's critically important, and it's probably accurate. It's just exactly what's going on. So
it is exactly what's going on, and according to this Jim Stone, freelance journalist, actually. George Soros swears he did not pay for the riots. We know that, George, as I've said all along. Your kid Jonathan did so. So your excuse does not cut it. But anyway, going back to these exotic weapons and the anxiety that people are feeling in their homes. The problem with manipulating cultures and populations through fear and disinformation, as we have been manipulated for so many decades, for all of our lives actually, by an elite which also controls the military and intelligence branches and the corporatocracy, is that to come out of the straitjacket of the mainstream media and the official cover stories is, as Deborah Tavares says, is truth trauma. But once you start to come out, then things start to make sense. Let me just read a little bit of an article. One of the most prolific and I think academically solid of the targeted individuals who I've researched is a woman from Davis and University of California, Davis, named Cheryl Welch. And she's written many, many good articles about this. One that I'm quoting from here is Making Sense of Mind Control and No-Touch Torture in Contravention of Conventional Wisdom. And she says, the history of CIA torture runs parallel to CIA neuroscience-based mind control research and also CIA non-lethal weapons research. This is important because mind control allegations, that would be from the victims, the targeted individuals, include descriptions of techniques that sound like all three CIA programs. In other words, MK Ultra never stopped. It is possible that the related Cold War CIA no-touch torture, non-lethal weapons, and neuroscience-based mind control programs have commingled for intelligence uses. Now, I'm suggesting, Jeff, that we should be all trying to get a little conversant with these topics because I think that directed energy weapons are in use against Americans now. They're silent, they're secret.
Oh, you bet they are. Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they're used against politicians. They're used against quote-unquote dissidents and whistleblowers. William Binney, the NSA whistleblower, who was very, very high in the NSA, but quit when he saw that his own programs were being used against Americans, he has recently come out and said he's a targeted individual and a target of these same kinds of exotic non-lethal weapons. Non-lethal is in quotes because they can be tuned up to become quite lethal. But these would be what the military calls soft kill, silent kill, slow kill, neuro weapons, etc. And these have gone mainstream. And the corporatocracy and the academic establishment, which has worked over the last 70 years to develop these things, unbeknownst to 99.5% or 99.9% of Americans, these agencies have cashed in because they have all these exotic weapons, cyber warfare and nano warfare and neuro warfare, etc. And this is the revolution in military affairs that occurred in the 70s and 80s, and now all of our major military forces are involved in this, not only in foreign countries to get the result they want, which is always compliance to American objectives, but also in this country. In other words, enemies or quote-unquote terrorists or dissidents dissidents or subversives are identified anywhere and then can be attacked with these no-touch torture, soft kill, silent kill, slow kill weapons, as I have been ostensibly and openly, well, at least since 2003. And I've been reading other reports of other very, very I must say, brilliant targeted individuals like Dr. Ronnie Kilda and Kay Griggs, who you've interviewed, and Gloria Naylor, et cetera. And you start to read these accounts and you realize that, okay, these weapons are being used by our government, our military, our intelligence establishment, and by our fellow citizens because they like to kind of spread the guilt. This is the gang stalking is the topic, or the organized stalking, electronic torture, as it's sometimes called. This is often carried out by private agencies as well, and by your neighborhood watch people.
Oh,
so your neighbors
your neighbors,
neighbors become your torturers.
Yeah.
And so what we're starting to see, and I heard this expressed by somebody on an interview, is we now have an open-air electronic concentration camp or prison in which the prisoners themselves are enlisted to become the prison guards. So Americans then are enlisted to become surveillance role players. They're enlisted to become crisis actors. Now we're going to have contact tracers. And we become the heavies. Then we become our own neighbors in Neighborhood Watch or community policing agencies, then do the dirty work for the military and the intelligence agencies.
A quick word about that. People might be listening and say, what are you talking about? Why would my neighbor do anything to ever harm me? When the neighbor is contacted by one or two, maybe more, people who have big, very impressive wallets with government credentials, maybe a badge, and they say, I'm with the Department of Homeland Security, your neighbor over there, across the street, we think is engaged in potentially dangerous activities. And we would ask you, will you help us keep an eye on? If we give you some technology, some equipment, would you put that in your house and just what we'll pay you, $1,000 a month just to let us put this up on your roof, whatever. The limitlessness of employing and enlisting neighbor against neighbor is scary. A little bit of money, little con job, and your neighbor becomes your jailer or your keeper or your prosecutor. It's that bad. And the technology, as Eric is saying, and I've been saying forever, is so far ahead of what you might imagine. Not you people necessarily, but the average person. They wouldn't, on a bet, even take a flying chance extending their mind and believing what's really out there. It just doesn't work for them. But it is truly advanced. It's amazing what they can do.
Yeah, it is phenomenal, and that's why I think people should start to, avail themselves of the information. We are an open society, as George Soros likes to say, and the information is out there. For instance, I've got on my website pulled up Joint Non-Lethal Weapons Directorate, JNLWD, and this is a unclassified document from the military that dates to 2011. Here's another one that's Non-Lethal Weapons Program from 2016. So we can find these official military documents which talk about these very technologies. And yeah, Department of Homeland Security would be involved in what you're saying. FBI is very involved and has been since their COINTELPRO or counterintelligence program of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, which, that's all a matter of public record. The FBI killed 28 Black Panthers in order to suppress, any movement of independence by the blacks. It killed the beautiful actress Jean Seberg. I'll never forgive them for that. She's such a beautiful woman, and all she did was have a good heart and want to, help the civil rights movement. And they harassed her to suicide. And from what I'm understanding now, the technology of surveillance was such that Nixon and J. Edgar Hoover enjoyed watching her harassment in the White House. house, because they have this sensing technology that goes back to the Vietnam War, et cetera, which can track and target somebody 24/7.
Well,
so all of us targeted individuals,
they killed her.
Probably many more are done.
She was murdered.
Yeah.
Give us your website again, the URL for people so they know. What is it?
It's gang stalking, mind control cult, all one word, .com. There's now about 13 or 1,400 articles there, all kinds of testimonies from different targeted individuals, all kinds of official documents, and the research of the people that I consider most legitimate and sane. Because, as you say, there are always going to be the moles and the disinformation agents
too many.
Who will try to make a mockery of the whole thing,
And they do, unfortunately. Yeah. Okay. Once again, gang stalking, for all of you out there, gang stalking, mind control, cults.com. We'll link it to your name here. Get it up there.
Yeah, and for those who don't want to write it all out, I've got another one which goes to the same website. It's just simpler. It's globalgestapo.com. And this is really what we're looking at. We're looking at a global Stasi state or a global Gestapo state. All these things have been tried in the past. Right. The Soviets, had their Cheka police and their KGB, and that morphed into the East German Communist Stasi, which they really perfected it. And those people came, such as Marcus Wolf, came and consulted for our new Department of Homeland Security after 9/11 in 2002. So we had representatives from the Soviet Union and Communist East Germany help us design our Department of Homeland Security. So that tells you that it's a totalitarian system, and so this is going on in the background. And I can tell you from my experience from that of many other TIs, that this COVID-19 has not slowed down the targeting of targeted individuals in America and elsewhere, which tells me that these are nested operations, that they are carried out by the same forces, the same entities, and they are both towards the same goal, which is this technocratic totalitarian police state in which individual sovereignty and national sovereignties are not respected. So this is why I think it's a real good time for people to brush up on their Constitution, their Declaration of Independence, and grow a backbone, grow a spine, and to take off your stupid mask, which brands you as a slave, and which actually is bad for your health, and take off your stupid gloves, which actually transmit disease more than if you were not wearing gloves. I mean, you talk to a medical person, if they're doing medical work in the hospital, they'll change gloves 100 times a day. And they've got you wearing these. They've made fools of you. They're making fools of you. They're having you say, "I'm an idiot," and then you're having you sanction your own behavior to help somebody else. Theoretically, you're okay. I'm being a good person. What do they call that now? They've got a word for that. All these words, but it's a psychological operation. It's the people the psychologists that were paid by the CIA to help them design their no-touch torture program at Guantanamo Bay, $90 million, according to an article I read. They were trying to impose learned helplessness. I think this is what's happening. So imagine we're all in Guantanamo Bay now as an electronic concentration camp. We're all being taught learned helplessness in order to be sheeple. And gosh, that's not how this country started, I don't think. I think we had some people with spines back then.
Yeah. Even if it was only 3%, they had spines and they stood up and they did it. That's right. This is really amazing. When all of you out there consider the fact that it's not hard for them to recruit neighbors. Let's say you've got neighbors that you don't know. You've never met. They live across the street from you. You know the way it is now, people don't even know their damn neighbors. So it's easy to go and recruit those people. And those people are all profiled in advance anyway. They know who they are. They know how they think. They know what they do. If they fit the profile, they'll be approached. This is gang stalking. This is very easy. We'll give you $1,000 a month if you let us know, whatever. And It's not a problem. If you have a neighbor who's a good buddy of yours, they're not going to approach that person because he'll tell you or she'll tell you. So they'll go to the people that really don't know you well, and they'll paint you out to be some monster in hiding, and they need your help. That's how they do a lot of it. All right? It's not hard. It just isn't.
Right. And, it was the young Yale psychologist Stanley Milgram in the 1960s who wrote a book called Obedience to Authority. And he conducted these obedience experiments that were replicated, which is based on some trickery by the psychologist, in which some 65 to 90% of average people who are participating in his experiment will shock or believe they are shocking a fellow human being to death based on the authority and the instructions of the authority figure. So like you say, if the FBI guy comes and flashes a badge, and it is often the FBI, because they're intimately involved with this and have been since the 50s, but it's also the privatized version of the FBI, InfraGard, and hundreds of other private corporations that are run by ex-FBI guys. So this is the FBI, it is the NSA, it is the CIA, it is DHS.
That's right. And it's independent contractors, tons of them.
Yep.
Former agency, former intel people. What are they going to do when they retire? They start their own. And there are always government monies available to pay them. I want to acknowledge the author of that book, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, Laurel Canyon, Covert Ops, and the Dark Heart of the Hippie Dream, David McGowan, along with Nick Bryant. Dave was just a terrific guest, wonderful man, and they took him out. I have no doubt. You remember 10, 12 years ago, there was a congressman in New Mexico. His name was Steve Schiff. True, not Adam, Steve Schiff. Maybe the same family, I don't know. But he was after the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, to have them subpoenaed and forced to turn over all of their records pertaining to the UFO ET issue. Now, any study or any interaction or anything to do with UFOs and ETs ultimately has to be paid for. That's the game. So it'll show up in the OMB. And he was subpoenaing them to come before Congress and turn over these records. And he came down with a little facial squamous cell carcinoma, one of the easiest form of cancer to treat. They just burn it, freeze it off. He was dead within a year. They couldn't stop it. They couldn't stop it. And the same thing with David Dees. He had multiple melanoma tumors in his body, his lungs, his kidneys. He had 2 in his spine. And he went through 10 as a last resort because it paralyzed him. The one tumor in his spine was so bad it pressed on his spinal column, and he couldn't walk. He lost the use of his right leg. And it was starting to work on the other leg. So he finally said, well, I'm going to go and talk to these people. We talked about it, and he went in and talked to an oncology radiologist and some other people. And anyway, they decided that the doctor told him, 50-50 chance we can get rid of that tumor and you'll be able to walk again. All right? And we talked about it, and he said, I got to try this. And he had 10 sessions over a period of about a week and a half. And they hit 2 tumors, one down low, one up higher in his spine. And he never recovered from that. It wiped him out, that radiation. And the doctor's office, I had permission to talk to them. They told me, I asked the head nurse, I said, what did the radiation achieve? What did it do? And there was a pause, and she said, well, I have to be honest here and tell you that the tumors were completely non-responsive to the radiation. I said, what? I said, these are organic tumors. Are you telling me the radiation did nothing to them? No, it did nothing, and they've shown signs of more growth. So when you said unstoppable cancer, that's what I think we're dealing with in terms of David Dees. That's what they gave David, I think, because nothing he did was working. And if radiation can't do something, Eric, that is observable, 10 big blasts, there's something going on here. That's weird. Just not right.
Yeah, we have so many lethal weapons that the power elite and actually organized crime too can use against individuals. It really is something that people should beware of. I mean, these exotic weapons that Dennis Kucinich tried to ban in his space treaty of 2001. The lasers, the masers, the beam weapons, the etc. All of this stuff has been cloaked under different programs such as Star Wars Strategic Defense Initiative. What's really been going on is the mind control and the development of these directed energy weapons, which of course is the basis then of the whole revolution in military affairs, fourth generation warfare, on and on and on. But again, for covert operations, that is to say against individuals, which is more and more what the Defense Department has been focusing on since 9/11. We're going to go after individuals now. We're going to call them terrorists or terrorist groups. Anywhere in the world, we'll take them out with a whole variety of methodologies, including this no-touch torture. And here's what Dor Zegers says. This is in the Cheryl Welsh article. Dor Zegers is a psychologist. Explained the techniques of the no-touch torture work by creating deception, distrust, fear, disorientation, quote, a kind of total theater that leaves the victim disoriented and, quote, emotionally and psychologically damaged. The similarity of the explanation below to street theater, quote unquote, found in mind control allegations is remarkable. So the psychological component then of torture, be it against individuals in Guantanamo Bay or perhaps en masse in the whole country, would become kind of a total theater, which is a constructed unreality of lies and inversion in a plot that ends inexorably with the victim's self-betrayal and destruction. Does that sound like it might be applied to the entire nation now?
You bet. You bet. Absolutely. Eric, thank you for sharing all that brilliant hour, and we'll talk to you again real soon. We'll keep watching this. I really respect the way you analyze things and bring it all together. You've just made it clear. This is planet-wide. This is planet-wide. They're making the big move, and it'll be continually increasing in every venue you can imagine. They've got it's all been thought out. They know what they're doing. And watch soon, crop failures, climate issues will cause crop failures, rain, drought, you name it, food riots. There's going to be a lot of trouble ahead. So again, to all of you out there, you've got a little time left. Please put food away. Be prepared. Thanks, Eric. We'll talk again soon. You be well.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Good night.
Okay, good night. Dr. Eric Karlstrom, and just a really good look at what's going on. I'm going to contact Nikki. If you're listening, Nikki Rapana, I've got to get in touch with you and get you back on here. Communitarianism. Okay, we will be right back. Hold on.